You are listening to Spiritual Insurgency with Jason Lupo and Aaron Lujan, a show that brings reckoning to today's culture and the impact on the body of the church. No topic is off the table on the quest to take back our churches. Join Jason and Aaron and swim against the current of the modern culture.
Welcome to Spiritual Insurgency. I'm Jason Lupo with my co-host, the one, the only, Aaron Lujan.
I feel like I'm about to go boxing in Vegas.
Yeah, we need fighting out of the red corner.
Bruce Buffer.
The Mexican, I don't know.
Chicano.
The
5'8" from Albuquerque,
The
New Mexico.
Chicano Chinchilla, Aaron Lujan.
We
That's
did
how
talk
we go.
about getting Bruce Buffer on the show, at least for the intro.
I think so.
That would be amazing.
I know that Dana White introduced Trump at the RNC. However, I think that Bruce Buffer should have done it.
Absolutely. Bruce Buffer should do the inauguration.
I think so too. I think Dana White should be press secretary. I've said that now for 7 months, and I'm standing by it. Dana White for press secretary.
Who's better, Dana White or Alex Jones? Because Alex Jones would be epic too.
No, well, so I love the way that Dana White handles the press. I would love to see that.
Yeah.
He never would. I mean, that's like a full-time.
He would have to, though.
80-hour job. He's
Is
not
it
going to
really,
give
though?
up the UFC for that.
We just do it on Zoom now.
You know what? Hey, he could take his UFC press and the White House press at the same time.
Yeah.
After the fight. Trump once again made a appearance at UFC, the last UFC. And I don't know, maybe he'll make an appearance this weekend.
That'd be so cool.
It'd be epic.
Who's fighting this weekend?
Oh, you know what? It's a long card. It's a long card.
Okay.
I know that, gosh, I'd have to look it up. See,
No big
I don't
deal.
know off the top of my head.
Just
Anyways, we have some big stories here.
We're talking news today, Jason.
So, Yemi Mobolade, the mayor of Colorado Springs.
You say that really well. I don't think anybody can pronounce his name.
I don't even know if I pronounced it right.
I say Yemi blah 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 blah.
That's never mind.
So go ahead.
Anyways, so, he won this race in a runoff against Wayne Williams, former Secretary of State. Yemi Mobolade was a former pastor at First Presbyterian Church down in Colorado Springs. I believe was involved in the Colorado Springs I Love You, COS I Love You.
That's right. He was also a business owner.
He's a business owner, owned multiple restaurants, which there's a whole nother scandal behind that. But, I think it's important when we look at this to remind ourselves that he ran on this idea that he was an independent,
Right.
And that he was a part of the church.
Right.
And on top of that, so right after the election, the Democrats claimed victory.
Mm-hmm.
So the chair of the Democrat Party in El Paso County claimed victory when Yemi won.
But I thought it was billed as a nonpartisan candidate
That's
race.
what he built himself as.
Right.
It's a nonpartisan race. But anyways, Yemi did, after some hard hits, come out and reject his congratulations from the Democrat Party and said, no, I'm an independent.
Okay, which is good.
So here, the Daily Wire breaks this story in November, and we have an update. This is on the Daily Wire. Mobolade last week claimed that he was the victim of a hate crime even after Derek Bernard, a black man who has since been convicted of an unrelated murder, was indicted for scrawling the N-word on a Mobolade's campaign sign and lighting her cross on fire in April 2023. The election eve hoax was intended to gin up sympathy for Mobolade, who is black, in his race against a white Republican. Mobolade was soon after elected in the city, a traditional Republican stronghold. The indictment says that Bernard was in communication with Mobolade, including him letting him know that there was a plot amidst beforehand, messaging him the day of the hoax to say that he guaranteed that he would win, and holding a 5-minute phone call days after the incident. Daily Wire reported on November 21st that an FBI official said that the Bureau referred the mayor for criminal prosecution for lying after he denied communicating with Bernard in 2 separate interviews. The Department of Justice refused to prosecute him, citing racial and political considerations, and instead called him for a 3rd interview where his story changed to, "I don't recall." the officials said. In a statement to the Colorado Springs Gazette, Mobilotti disparaged the Daily Wire without specifically denying the report's accuracy. He said, "My family and I are a victim of a hate crime allegedly committed by 3 suspects against our city. I had no knowledge, warning, or involvement in this reprehensible act. It is unfortunately not a new trend that politically motivated websites will weigh in with no regard for accuracy or truth and interest only in sensationalism and scandal. I fully cooperated in the investigation, and it is important that the judicial process is followed to allow for a successful prosecution that brings justice for our community."
That's one hell of a public relations statement.
I mean, he's still claiming that he's the victim of a hate crime. That everybody that's indicted in this situation is black. He's black. And there's this hate crime that he's the victim of. And there's enough evidence that shows that he knew about this. I don't know if he paid them to plot it or whatever, but he knew that this was happening.
It's like the MAGA country hoax in Chicago.
Or, what's his face? The guy walking down New York City that supposedly gets beat up for being
Jussie
gay.
Smollett. This is J.C. Smollett in Colorado.
This is Smollett. And it's sad because here is, we have this already bad look of politics. And the church goes, I don't want to be involved in politics. And they've said that for far too long. And now we have a former pastor that is doing these things, right? How does that entice the church to go, you know what? Yes, we do need to be involved in politics.
This is an affliction of the church. This is putting manna above the kingdom of God. This guy looks like he's more interested in his political career than he is in advancing the kingdom of God.
I mean, I just wonder, what does this guy have on some other people? Because here's a guy that the media really didn't cover his background or his history. This is a guy that in his restaurants would hang pride flags,
that's right,
Black Lives Matters flags, Black Lives Matter signs, super involved in making sure that we mask up during COVID. Like, the media didn't cover any of this.
And you're referring to local media.
Yeah, and now the media is still not covering this.
Right.
Why is a national publication, a national news source, the one that's breaking a story in Colorado Springs? Why is the local news not breaking this story?
I really don't know why.
And where's the accountability?
No, but why? Why isn't the Gazette? Why isn't the Independent? Why isn't KRDO? Why aren't any of the local Springs outlets covering this story?
I couldn't tell you.
That's crazy to me.
They're protecting him for some reason. I don't know why.
So you think he's being protected?
I think he's being protected. This is a guy. He had several communications with the guy that was the head honcho of this hoax, Bernard. Right. Bernard is also convicted of basically a hit on a rapper in Colorado Springs.
This is weird.
The story gets crazy.
It's like Suge Knight level, bro.
Right? So why is Yemi Mobilotti connected to Derek Bernard, obviously a pretty serious murderer? Why did he have a 5-minute phone call with Yemi days after the election? This was the first election, too. This wasn't even the runoff.
Mm-hmm.
But, all of this happens, supposedly drums up support for Yemi. Oh, my gosh, he's a victim of a hate crime. It's a crazy story. There's
so much to unpack. The first thing that comes to mind is this fact that we're perpetuating racism. We're perpetuating this idea that, we're still stuck in 1950, and this victimhood narrative that, we don't want black politicians in power because they're black. I mean, this is so old. I'm just exhausted. Like, I'm exhausted from the Obama years.
Yeah, well, it goes back to the Sadducees. It goes back to the Sanhedrin, right? Like, we have this modern day Sanhedrin. We have this modern day, political wing that just can never be held accountable, that will make up things to drum up support, use the judicial system against their political opponents. We see Biden just recently pardoning his son Hunter, dating back to, what was it, 2004 or something, 2014?
Yeah, it's like 13 years grandfathered.
Here's the thing. we don't even know like what happened in 2014 because there's been no criminal charges.
So there's stuff they know.
The only thing we know is about the laptop and we know about the gun charges.
Yeah.
Like, why do we have to pardon this individual all the way back? Like, hey, we're going to wipe his slate completely clean.
Yeah.
What does Biden think he is? Jesus?
It's just funny they go back to 2013. There's obviously something back there that they're hiding that we don't know about.
I want to know what it is.
The timeline's interesting. 2013, I think, is where they went back to.
Well, and when does, I mean, listen, there's another month or so of this presidency, right? Another month. When do we start seeing more pardons of the Biden crime family? Like, are we going to see like this blanket pardon of Jill Biden? Are we going to see this blanket pardon of other family members of the Biden family?
Well, the pardoning is going to tell a really interesting story, isn't it? There's going to be a lot of people that are going to be brought up, and we're going to be like, well, who is that guy? Why is he being pardoned? What's going on?
Well, and what's interesting is from the Democrat side, if I were a Democrat strategist at this present moment, the lasting thing that I would tell Biden he needs to do is to pardon the J6ers, right? Trump's going to do it anyways. They weaponize the judicial system against these poor people, right? Some of these people in their 70s, 80 years old, where they're going through these court cases and court trials, racking up hundreds of $1,000s in attorney bills, and they're going to get pardoned. Hopefully Trump pardons them. But if I'm a Democrat right now looking at this like atrocious beat where it's basically like a, hey, we know what you've done. We've seen what you've done. We don't agree with your policy. We don't agree with your weaponization of the judicial system against your political opponents. And pardon J6ers. Like, coming from the Biden administration, I think it goes a really long way for their future.
So you're saying that they should do this for public relations purposes?
I think so. It's a matter of what's the right word?
Goodwill?
Like, yeah, there's
good faith.
There's an element of good faith, right? Trump agrees to offer up to pay Kamala's $1 billion or whatever she racked up in expenses that she never paid.
Bless your heart, Jason, and you're being, I think, kind. These are hardcore Satanists. These are pedophiles. Like, I don't think there's any drop of light in their souls. I really think that they're just going for scorched earth.
Oh, I don't think that they would do it out of
they're not gonna do
any
it.
sort of, remorse.
No, it wouldn't be out of remorse, but even just to spite the J6ers, I think that they prioritize their ill will over their own political strategy. I mean, they've committed political suicide and they're now dead. I mean, wokeism is dead, effective November 4th.
I mean, that's what we hope. I don't know. I think at some point it's going to be replaced with something crazier.
Yeah, there's going to be some replacement, but what I'm saying is the election of Donald Trump on November 4th was a repudiation of wokeism, was a repudiation of liberalism. The electoral map geographically, physically shows America's not on board with this ideology, no matter how hard LA and New York push this narrative.
Oh, 100%. 100%. Yeah, it's an interesting climate that we live in, and I don't know, like, people have short-term memory loss. Do people just forget how we got here in 4 years? Or do they look at what's coming with the Trump presidency, look at it from a perspective of, like, what's actually good for the country, what's actually going to happen, and then vote based on what they saw in the previous 4 years? Like, if the Republicans do it right, if the church does it right, and I'm not talking about Republicans in the church as one thing, right?
Please.
However, if you look at the parties and their platform and you're voting on your worldview, you're probably voting Republican.
Probably. Well, as Elon Musk said, all the moderates are now Republicans.
Yeah, 100%. Nancy Pelosi looks like one heck of a moderate.
What world do we live in?
I mean, it's kind of crazy. We're going to take a brief break. When we come back, we're going to continue this conversation. Hang with us.
Teamwork is at the core of any successful organization. Full Armor Sports, led by national champion coach Jason Lupo, is now registering for school year sports programs. Full Armor is a multi-sport teaching and training organization with homeschool options available. All of Full Armor sports coaches are certified and experts in their field. Full Armor's coaches combine for over 500 years of coaching experience. They will help your kids gain fundamental skills, the concepts of teamwork, essential to being successful throughout their lives. Multiple sports options are available now, from swimming, softball and volleyball, to powerlifting and youth MMA. The faith-based approach to making sports fun and productive are a great choice for your kids at Full Armor Sports Teams. Learn more at fullarmorsportsteams.com.
This is Spiritual Insurgency. I'm Jason Lupo with my co-host, Aaron Lujan.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning and welcome. We have more breaking news here. The United Healthcare CEO shot and killed in Manhattan on Wednesday, this last Wednesday. What do we take on this? Like, obviously this has got to be some sort of targeted attack.
Well, Fox News is reporting that new evidence suggests that the suspect who killed United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson on Wednesday may have left a message behind on the bullet casings at the scene. Police sources tell the New York Post that the words deny, depose, and defend were written on the live rounds and casings left behind by the assassin after the shooting. Evidence also shows that each bullet and casing had just one word written on it, leading them to believe he may have been trying to leave a message, sources say. When I first heard this, I just thought, for decades, millennials have been subjected to programming that the only gangsters, the only thugs are inner city blacks and Hispanics. That's been music, film, television. We have this programming embedded in us. And when you actually look at where do the drugs come from, who's actually putting hits on people, where are the real gangsters? And I find them in corporate America. I find them in the pharmaceutical executives, the healthcare executives. So I think this is just another example of how gangster and corrupt our financial system and our society is.
Well, and who knows, right? Like this, like I don't know. This story is still breaking, and by the time the show airs, like we may have way more information on this thing. But could it be somebody whose wife or child was denied medical care for something? Right? Like we are staring at the face of a issue with our health insurance, right? Like we're going to at some point see what we see in some other countries where we have death panels where they say, like your life really it's coming to an end, like you're not really you don't play a huge role in society, like we're not going to pay for this $90,000 surgery because, well, it's not going to keep you alive very long. And so we start having these discussions where all of a sudden health insurance companies are like, you know what? Like, we can do this surgery, but the amount of money it's going to cost to keep this individual alive afterwards is not worth it. Yeah. And the health insurance doesn't want to pay for it. And so I think we're going to see more and more of this, like, denying healthcare. Maybe that's what that word deny means. Like, maybe this is some individual that was denied access to medical treatment.
Yeah, I go a little bit further, and I'm thinking about conspiracy. I'm thinking about power brokers moving opposition out of the way. When you get to the highest levels of power, especially corporate power, where there's billions of dollars at stake, there's a lot of motivation for people to be removed and eliminated.
Oh, 100%. Now we're seeing this like ushering in of what looks to be the potential of a wide-scale attack on the pharmaceutical industry with RFK.
Thank you.
Right?
Yes.
And so what are we going to do? Like, what are we going to do if all of a sudden all the information comes out that we have been knowingly killing individuals or seriously harming individuals with certain pharmaceutical drugs?
Yeah.
Like, when do we get to the point where vaccine manufacturers are no longer protected? Mm-hmm. Right? Where they can't just cause injury for the quote unquote greater good and not be responsible for the injuries that they cause.
Well, Anthony Fauci is surrounded by armed bodyguards for a reason. I remember situations post-COVID after the vaccines were rolled out in Australia, doctors were being targeted for hit jobs because there was revenge, there was desired retribution for these families who felt it was the pharmaceutical industries who murdered their family members. And so, yeah, I think we have a public post-COVID that is really upset. We have a public now that's aware that they're being scaled in mass. They're being poisoned in mass with the water and the food and the chemicals. And I think that when you combine that with just the state in which the general population's in, with anxiety and stress and hyped up on pharmaceutical drugs, it's a bad combination. And I think we might be seeing more of this, that as society devolves, we're going to see more situations like the case with Brian Thompson, executives, people in power getting killed by people that are vengeful.
Well, and it's interesting because when you look at the COVID crisis, right, we have a drug, ivermectin, that there's research that shows that it worked.
Yeah.
And it worked well. The problem is that ivermectin has been on the market for so long that there's a generic. So nobody makes any money.
Right.
And so why, here they're like, well, if we let them use this cure of ivermectin, we're not going to make a cent, right? We're going to make very little.
Right.
But if we come up with these crazy vaccines that we force on people, and that, we have pharmaceutical companies that are profiting largely by the demand of the government for citizens to comply, right? And meanwhile, all these individuals are probably holding shares in all of these pharmaceutical companies that they're now requiring individuals to get.
It's a game. And this story that backs right into what you're saying, Jason, vaccine researcher says wave of viruses will hit after Trump's inauguration, according to modernity.news. Vaccine researcher Peter Howitz, who previously called for Joe Rogan to be censored for COVID misinformation, predicted that a wave of viruses would hit the U.S. after Donald Trump's inauguration. So it looks like they're going to weaponize this if this guy's right. He says it's all over wild birds on the western part of the United States and going to be up north. It's getting into the poultry, he said, referring to H5N1. We're seeing sporadic human cases, no human-to-human transmission yet, but that could happen. This reminds me of exactly what they did in Trump's first administration, right? He was having this wild economy, and then boom, the brakes hit, COVID. And these people don't typically come up with new tricks. It's kind of like their father, the devil. He just continually relies on the same tactics over and over again because they work. Yeah,
right?
fear.
It's fear.
You're going to die if you don't do what we say.
Right? Like, fear is one of the best motivating factors in human psychology, right? Like, why do people show up to a job that they absolutely cannot stand, that they hate doing, where they're treated wrong,
and they hate everybody there,
and they don't like anybody that they work with? Well, because they have a fear that if they quit, they're going to lose their job.
That's right.
Right? Why do people all of a sudden shape up and start doing their job after years of not doing their job? Well, because they're being threatened to fire.
Exactly.
Like, they're going to be fired if they don't shape up.
Right.
And so we are motivated by fear as a population.
Right.
And it's a control tactic as well, right? Like, here you go back to the judicial system and the weaponization of the judicial system, and it's like, well, if I don't fall in line, all of a sudden they're going to come after me.
Fear.
And I think like 20 years ago, we probably didn't question a lot of what was going on in terms of like judicial mispractice. But now you have like Netflix breaking stories on making a murderer and all these other things. And you start to go like, would a local PD, would a local district attorney actually set up some poor guy in a murder indictment to get rid of him?
All the time.
Like, how often is this happening? Is it happening in our own city? And then you look at the Yemi case and the Yemi Mobilade case, and you're like, why are we protecting this dude?
Yeah.
He lied to the FBI. Like, it's clear as day. He lied to the FBI. Why are we protecting him?
And to speak to fear in Psalms 46, we as the believers, we as the kingdom of God have the antidote. Psalm 46 verse 2, therefore we will not fear, though the earth give way and the mountains fall into the sea, into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam and the mountains quake with their surging. I don't know if this is true. Check me on this, but the Bible references do not fear 365 times.
I've heard conflicting numbers, and I think it depends on the translation.
Let's call it hundreds.
Hundreds, yeah.
There's a big deal with God in telling his children, fear not.
Oh, 100%, right? Because when you are in fear, then you lack trust in God's plan.
Bingo.
Right?
It's a lack of faithfulness.
When fear controls you, when the devil or the evil spirits implement fear into your life for whatever reason, and you start to be controlled and you're making decisions based on fear, and fear is guiding you, what's not guiding you? The Holy Spirit.
That's right.
Christ. And so fear is a huge tactic of the devil, right? And when we look at this and we look at all the things that are happening, this is not going to get better. It doesn't matter who's president. This is not going to get better because we fail to look at what's going on locally far too often.
Well, I think there's going to be fireworks in January. We just had leading Democrats give speeches on the House floor about establishing a shadow government. I don't know if you heard about this story.
I did not.
But he basically said, if we don't, since we're not going to be officially in power, we're going to have a parallel NIH. We're going to have a parallel, all the three-letter agencies are going to have parallel counterparts. And we are going to run a parallel government. And this was said on the House floor. And look that up. Maybe we bring that up later in the broadcast. But the reason I bring that up, Jason, is they didn't get their way. They being the deep state, they being the enemies of this nation who are inside domestic enemies, as the Constitution refers to them, because obviously we have them amongst us now. They're not giving up because they lost on November 4th. So back to the article about modernity.news with this vaccine researcher saying that the new administration may be hit with viruses. This makes sense to me because why would they not want to make life living hell for this incoming Trump administration? Well,
there's so many issues. I mean, we could talk about this for literally hours, right? I had a conversation with a police officer the other day.
You were arrested?
No, I was not arrested.
Oh, okay. That was another thing.
And I'm not going to go into extreme details of why I started this conversation with him, but I was talking about a law with him. And he said something along the lines of, well, that's not how it works. And I said, well, the law allows for this reasonable allowance to basically forego the law that's in place. It's hard to do this without talking about the situation, but I'm going to. And he goes, well, that's not really how it works. And I said, well, isn't that for a judge to decide, right? Like, at the end of the day, when we have laws that are made in the legislature, and now we have police that are trying to essentially enforce the law, when there's a debate on what the law reads or what the law says, we have a judicial system that is supposed to evaluate that in multiple levels and multiple steps. And so if the county court says and the county judge says, yeah, that's not the way that I'm interpreting this law, and you still disagree, then you go up the chain, right? And you go up the chain all the way to the Supreme Court. That's how our judicial system works. But what's happened is we have this whole chain of individuals that all believe that they have some sort of judicial power that are in our midst. And so we have, during the COVID crisis, we have health departments that feel like they have judicial powers. And you just continue on, right? We have businesses that now believe that they somehow have judicial power. Individuals that somehow believe that they now have judicial power.
Well, wasn't that the whole mask mandate?
Yeah. I mean, this whole mask mandate was everybody thinking that all of a sudden they were the new law enforcement, that they were the new judicial enforcement, right? Like, we didn't even have a proper, what do you call it? Like, if you were charged with a crime, you have your day in court.
Due process.
Due process, thank you. We got rid of due process during COVID.
Right.
We were shutting down businesses in churches and things like that and just going, well, like, you're closed.
And I was speaking to El Paso County sheriffs. They were utterly confused. They didn't know what to do, and they just kept leaning on this trespassing thing. But they were confused because the law was confusing, because there was no law.
There was no law. What should have happened was the legislature at the time should have been convened. We should not have been ruling by executive order. But on top of that, when we go back to this idea of due process, everybody should have their day in court. It's what's guaranteed to us in the Constitution.
Right.
And the amount of times where we have taken drastic financial impacts to businesses and skipped this entire process of due process is utterly wrong, right? Like, one of the big concerns when you talk about shadow governments and when you talk about this upcoming, whatever the next pandemic is going to be, is, do we see that those that are currently in place, which most of the governors are still the same as they were during the COVID crisis, do we see it play out the same way? Or do we see some sort of change in how they go about essentially controlling the population?
I think the reaction of the public is going to be dependent on how serious this next virus is going to be. But what I will say, regardless of how benign or how serious this virus is going to be that they plan on potentially releasing in 2025, I will say that there's going to be a huge number of people that are not going to comply. They're not going to comply with the mask mandates. They're not going to comply with 6 feet social distancing. They're not going to lock down in their homes again. They're not going to abuse their children by refusing them to be outside and stay indoors. They're just not going to do it because they know that we're dealing with a bunch of criminals. And I'm here saying, no way am I going to comply with anything next year.
Yeah. It's very interesting. You know, we just saw South Korea go through this process of putting in place martial law.
Yeah.
And I don't know, have they since taken it away? I don't fully know the story, but like, we see all the time that when we have this uprising across the world right now, right?
Yeah.
Venezuela,
Georgia,
Ireland, all over the place, right? And when governments are trying to take complete control of the population says, not a chance.
Yeah.
And so when South Korea tried to put in martial law, things got worse, not better.
But here's my concern, though. It's kind of maybe a trap. They want a conflict. They want to shake the hornet's nest so that they can institute their martial law and they can bring in the blue helmets and the UN and get their order out of chaos, the Hegelian dialectic.
Well, and the thing about it is right, like, you'd like to think that at some point somebody that's in government locally would just be like, yeah, we're not doing that. And what frustrated the crap out of me in El Paso County was you had talked about the sheriffs not knowing what to do or how to enforce this law. But you have a DA who said behind closed doors that he wouldn't prosecute anybody that broke COVID restrictions. And you had a sheriff that said, well, we're not going to really make arrests for this. But none of them ever came out publicly and made that stance.
Right.
And that's what I fought for so hard, was like, okay, go out publicly and make that stance. Make it known to businesses that, you know what, go ahead and reopen. We're not going to do anything about it.
Well, I think we have two power structures when you refer to people in government, right? I think you're referring to the federal component, right? And then you're referring to local government. And I think that at the federal level, that's where you're going to see a lot of the evil come in, because they're all basically sex blackmailed. I mean, that's essentially the conclusion that I've come to on how the federal government and how Washington runs. It's blackmail, okay? Now, they're going to push all the tyranny. They're going to push everything down our throats to maybe create a standoff and to create chaos in this country. Where my hope lies is the local governments, your local sheriff's departments, your
my
mayors.
hope lies in Jesus Christ.
Of course. But I'm speaking in the natural.
I got you.
Politically speaking, these threats are going to come from the federal, and the defense is going to come from the local. And you're going to have a standoff similar to the Obama years. If you remember, we had the Border Patrol I believe this has been, I think, already 8 or 10 years. We had local government stand off with federal government during the Obama administration over a dispute over BLM land. I want to say it was somewhere here in the West. Nevada is where it was. That story, I think, is prophetic of what we're going to see in 2025 if the federal government decides to push another virus epidemic, another flavor of tyranny. We're going to see an uprising at the local level. You're going to see sheriffs and good police departments and citizen militia say no. Because it wasn't that long ago, Jason, that we had a Wild West and we had citizens forming militias and creating governments. I mean, this is in our DNA. This America was born out of a bloody revolution.
Well, and you know what I said during the COVID crisis was, look, if the state law enforcement wants to come into your county and start shutting down businesses because the county's saying we're not doing this, then you take your sheriffs and you put them at the off ramps of every single off ramp in your county, and you say you're not entering my county, right? Yeah. Like, let's see this standoff. I mean, what would happen if we saw these local governments actually rise up? What would happen if we saw these city councils, these county commissioners go, you know what? We're not doing this.
The federal government would lose because constitutionally and morally, the power rests at the local level. Our American system is designed so that the more local you get, the more powerful you become. So the moral high ground is on our side. The law of the land is on our side. And I think the people, the citizens of the community are inclined to side with their local governments if they're to choose between federal mandates and a local defense.
Well, and we go back to due process, right? If we go back to due process and we say, look, if you're saying that I broke some law, which was an executive order, then you cite me, ticket me, give me a day in court, release me on bail, because I have a constitutional right to bail, right? And allow me my due process.
Sure.
But what happened in those situations was they put the punishment before the due process. And that's always going to be wrong, right? That's never going to be right in this country and never should be right.
Absolutely.
But anyways, we're going to take a brief time out. When we get back, continue this conversation. Hang with us.
Full Armor Sports Teams has a new facility for after-school youth programs. It's located at 2380 Montebello near North Academy and Union with 2 pools for swim lessons and swim teams, a weight room for powerlifting, conditioning, and more. Full Armor Sports Teams is a Christ-centered and family-oriented organization bringing the youth of Colorado Springs together. For more info on after-school and homeschool programs, go to fullarmorsportsteams.com or call 719-629-SWIM.
Welcome back to Spiritual Insurgency. I'm Jason Lupo with my co-host, Aaron Lujan.
Hello, brother.
All right, so Chicago. This was interesting. Just a couple days ago in a city council meeting, Chicago residents calling themselves Chicagoans for Trump. They were wearing red shirts, Chicagoans for Trump.
Southside, 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 Southside.
Now, this is like a seriously like hardcore Democrat stronghold for a long time.
Not no mo.
Like Illinois is very similar to a lot of the other states with big cities where the city is Democrat and every other part of the state is Republican. But the Chicago residents are getting furious over the illegal immigration, the harboring illegal immigrants, and the spending.
And let
right?
it be noted that a majority of these citizens you're referring to are black.
Yeah. And so,
and I say that because it kind of destroys the race narrative from the left. Please continue.
So here's Miss Lawrence, a separate speaker during the 30-minute public comment period, who did not state her first name, said Johnson's time is limited. She accused him of harboring illegal aliens because there's a 10-year prison sentence when you want to stand up here for those illegals, Lawrence said. I mean, like, if you look at this, City of Chicago is out of the business of funding illegals. We are out of the business of prioritizing non-American citizens on top of American citizens. Johnson continues, this is an ongoing dynamic that really requires progressive, bold leadership at this present moment. Like, if you go down this list of these comments that these individuals are making, like, there's an accusation that 50% of the city funds were used on illegal immigration.
I think it's politically okay now to speak out on these truths because wokeism died on November 4th. We have Mayor Adams in New York saying undocumented New Yorkers aren't owed due process.
No.
And this is Mayor Adams of New York. I mean, this is not 2018, brother.
But they're also like, if you're a mayor, right? If you're a mayor and every day you see your crime rising.
Bingo.
And you start to feel like you have some sort of accountability to your constituents.
They're closer to the problem, and they feel the heat a lot stronger than these oligarchs sitting on their ivory towers.
Well, it's in their backyard, right? It's like the people in Colorado when the Venezuelans were taking over entire apartment complexes, which happened.
Yes.
Like, I don't know how the media can go, no, this is like overplayed. This didn't actually happen. It happened. I believe it's still happening.
Yeah, of course it is.
But if you're in like a different part of the state, you're hearing this and you're going like, well, it didn't really, like, I haven't seen it, right? Mm-hmm. Well, when you start to see it, and the entire state is going to start to see some of this stuff like Chicago and New York City has, then you're going to be all up in arms and you're going to be pissed off. And I think that's what's happened in so many of these places is like, they knew it was kind of existent, but it really wasn't affecting their everyday life. And now they're starting to look at it and go like, this is in my backyard, right? Like crime is at my doorstep.
Yes.
And now you need to do something about it because it ran out. Like it got rampant.
Well, this is the historical cycle of bad times, create strong men, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, we've been warning people. Those people have been paying attention about this for decades, but it's never become an issue until it finally affects you. I mean, this is always educational, right, until it becomes personal.
Yeah. Well, and listen, here's the funny thing, right? Trump starts talking about excise taxes, and the next day Trudeau is on a flight to Mar-a-Lago to meet with Donald Trump.
Like a
like the next day, the Mexican president is on the phone negotiating.
He's not even president yet.
He's not even president yet. He's done more than Biden has in 4 years. And who knows? I don't. Who's running the country right now? But that's a whole other topic.
Great question.
We can't get down that rabbit hole. But you have the Canadian prime minister and you have the Mexican president the next day on the phone with Donald Trump negotiating.
Right.
Because they know that if they don't, things are going to get really bad for their countries.
Absolutely.
Right. Like things are going to seriously be impacted. And so he draws them to the negotiating table instantly because they're like, no, we can't have this happen. And we needed that for so long. But here we have Chicagoans, New Yorkers saying, we're not doing this. Get to the negotiating table. And either they're going to get to the negotiating table or we could see a Republican mayor for the first time in a long time in the city of Chicago.
It's fascinating. And it's fascinating because the what is that old saying? The hen has come home to roost?
Yeah.
Yeah, the hen has come home to roost. Chicagoans and New Yorkers are looking at their communities completely unraveled. They are experiencing it every single day, and they're done. I mean, this is 1 + 1 = 2. We were warning people this was going to happen. It didn't become an interesting thing to talk about or stand up against until it finally affected them. Unfortunately, I think that's just human nature, right? We're not going to respond or do anything about it until it affects us personally.
Well, it's interesting, right? Every single state, with the exception of Colorado, moved right.
Right.
Every state, with the exception of Colorado.
In the entire union.
Entire union.
And by what metric are you saying moved right? Are you talking electoral votes for Trump or what?
No, like popular vote.
The popular vote.
Yes.
Went red except for Colorado. Even in California.
No, it moved right. I'm not going to say it went red.
It moved right. That's
right.
my question. What's the metric for moving right? How do you measure that?
They gain percentage points in every state. The
vote
Republicans took percentage points away from the Democrats in every single state.
in the presidential popular vote?
In the presidential popular vote.
Okay, interesting.
Right. And in most other counties and in most other cities, also, even if a Republican didn't win the seat, they gained more votes in a larger percentage of the vote than they had in previous election cycles.
I want to ask what's wrong with Colorado, but I think you want to stick to
BIOS
the immigration
passwords.
debate. Huh?
The BIOS password. This is the only state where we had every single password to all of our voting machines leaked out on the internet for anybody to find prior to the election. The only state that didn't move left. Now, what's interesting is here is a hardcore Democrat state who has now split the congressional district seats.
Interesting.
Gabe Evans wins in a close race and takes what was that? It was that 8, CD8. Jeff Hurd takes CD3, a race that Lauren Boebert looked like she was going to lose back in the last election cycle. She moved to CD4, won her race, and CD5 with Jeff Crank. And so now we have 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans coming out of Colorado into Congress. And so from that perspective, you go, okay, Colorado made some pretty drastic improvements. Mm-hmm. But in other sides and other places, you go, doesn't look like Colorado has a chance or a hope.
Somebody investigate Jenna Griswold's net worth and her assets, please.
Oh, listen, this lady, she will be running for governor.
Oh, I hope so. Let's get into I can't talk about Jenna Griswold.
We could say we hope so, but what if she wins? Like, that's the problem. This is probably the most corrupt Secretary of State in the entire union.
She makes El Chapo blush.
I mean, corrupt is and you want to talk about using the judicial system against her opponents. She threatened pretty much every county clerk that if they questioned the election integrity, that she would prosecute them.
Imagine being her husband, bro.
And she did that with Tina Peters.
Crazy.
Prosecuted her. Tina Peters now sitting in a jail cell for asking questions. And really, she was put in jail for releasing a portion of one BIOS password. Jenna Griswold released the entire password of all of the machines in Colorado.
She's a gangster, bro. She's just straight gangster.
Gangster.
She's a gangster.
I don't know if that's the word that I want to use. But anyways, you have another story for us. What do you got?
Wall Street parties like it's 1998 as AI fuels gains unmatched since the dot-com era. In addition, the ranks of 401k millionaires at Fidelity surged to new record, and $105 trillion inheritance windfall on way for U.S. heirs. I mentioned all 3 articles because what's happening while you're struggling to pay for eggs and milk and trying to figure out what credit card you're going to pay and which one you're not going to pay, you have an elite class that are 10x, 50x, 100x, Xing their wealth. We are seeing the middle class in real time getting destroyed, while you have the people sitting at the top, the hedge fund managers, the venture capital class, the corporate executive class are partying like it's 1998. The largest intergenerational wealth transfer in U.S. history is about to take place, according to MSN.com, though the vast majority of Americans are unlikely to inherit much money at all. $105 trillion is about to get passed, according to research firm Sorelli and Associates. So, I mean, this is just the rich getting a lot richer and a lot quicker. I think of the COVID bailouts. I think of all of the stimulus money that was printed. And I think of all of the theft that's probably taking place. I mean, we're hearing reports of the Pentagon not being able to account for billions of dollars under the Biden administration. So it's just something that I want to bring up to our listeners because we're being routed right now.
Well, if you remember, right, .com era, all of these companies way overvalued. What was the end solution? We see a huge drop in the market, right? A huge pullback. And so this is going to become like the largest pump and dump scheme of all time because we have stocks that are so overvalued right now and they keep going up. And at some point, what goes up must come down. And these individuals are probably going to sell their stock at the perfect right time, while the rest of Americans who are not as financially literate or not as literate to the market are going to get hit really hard when the stock comes crashing down, because those that own majority of the shares, when they start selling, those share prices are going to drop astronomically.
It makes me think, what would happen if they completely tanked the economy and released a virus at the same time in 2025? That would be fun.
Listen, we have a housing bubble that is ready to burst. I thought that this thing was going to burst years ago, and we saw a little bit of a pullback, but not drastically. Now, if Trump does some of the things that he's talking about, and the legislature does some of the things that are being discussed, like capping credit cards at 10% interest rate and all these other financial moves, we could see that this impending market doom, which I think that a vast majority of people see coming, will be lessened. And I don't know if Trump goes, well, we know that this is going to happen, and so let's start preparing for this. The question is, we saw Bitcoin break $100,000.
That's right.
And many people thought this day was never going to happen. Now, what we've seen in the past is when the market struggles, Bitcoin and the cryptocurrencies also fell, which busted this idea that the cryptocurrency was kind of like a hedge against the market. And when cryptocurrency fell at the same time as the stock market back during the COVID pandemic, it, I think, caused some distrust. Now, the question is was it really linked to the stock market, or was it linked to this need for liquidity, right? Like, did we see people pulling out a ton of coin because they just needed the liquidity because they no longer had a revenue stream? They no longer had income coming in. The government, shut everything down, and is that why we saw what we saw with cryptocurrency? Is it going to be different when the market crashes this time? Is cryptocurrency truly going to be that hedge? Or is it gold and silver?
It's going to be gold and silver.
From Rosalind Capital.
Not a sponsor, but if you would like to, go to spiritualinsurgency.com.
I'm just kidding. No, we do not have a link to Rosalind Capital. Maybe they should be a sponsor of our show. I don't know.
You said it like you're Italian.
I am Italian.
He put his fingers up, guys. I'm looking at gold and I'm looking at silver increase, especially within the last 12 to 18 months. It's obviously been a historical hedge against inflation. I say, folks, follow the gold prices, follow the silver prices. That will be your indicator on where the financial system is at, and invest in precious metals and land if you can, because that's real money. That's, gold is God's money.
Do we really believe that it's like this inflation or hedge against inflation though?
All the time.
Because silver really has not.
It's artificially suppressed. That's why.
You think so?
Absolutely. The markets are rigged, but they can only rig it to a certain point, because they control a lot of the trading platforms. They control a lot of the mines, which dictate supply. So it's rigged to a certain degree. A lot of the numbers that come out that Wall Street depends on are manipulated by organizations that have an invested interest in artificially suppressing the price of gold and silver. My personal conspiracy theory / opinion, make your own decision. Eventually gold will break out and silver will break out when the dollar collapses, because you can... Politically, we called it too big to rig. Manipulating the precious metals markets are also too big to rig. They can rig it to a certain point, but once there's a large fall in the dollar, you're going to see silver and gold surge and show its true colors.
Well, that's interesting, because we just haven't seen it to this point. So, the other day I was like, well, we've been hearing these ads for so long, right? Like, this is a hedge. This is a hedge on the market. This is, you have precious metals, which the thing about these precious metals too is that, like, many people own precious metals that they don't actually own in their hands.
Yeah.
And so what's to trust that all of a sudden those those metals are going to be available for trade if we have this impending collapse. Like it's an interesting thing. Like I feel like if I were to invest in gold or silver right now, like I would want physical gold and silver. I don't currently own any physical gold or silver, so don't come rob my house.
Me too.
All right, that doesn't exist. I don't have it for real.
In the past 6 months,
but I do own guns, so warning if you try to break in.
In the past 6 months, gold is up 11.5%.
But silver has not changed.
I'll take a lookie.
I don't believe silver has drastically changed.
Well, there's not going to be an expectation of anything drastically changing until I think we hit bottom with the dollar. But in the past 6 months, it's up 4.87%. Nothing drastic.
Yeah. Well, anyways, that's all we got for today. I mean, we have a ton of great content on our website. Go to spiritualinsurgency.com. We're still building it out. We're still adding more content. But, go there, find out more information. Hold people accountable. Like I think at the end of the day, if we're wrapping up this thing right now, it's that we have allowed the political elite this power.
Yeah.
And we've also seen that the people, when they take back power, when they expect that their politicians truly work for them, that we start to see changes. And we're seeing that in some of the areas around the country where I thought we'd never see it. And so what I would say, my parting note for today is, listen, as a church, as a body of believers, if you are silent, you are allowing this to take place, right? How many followers of Jesus Christ, when he went before the Sanhedrin to be crucified on the cross, stayed quiet?
Cowardice will not be acceptable when you stand before your Creator.
I mean, they were scared, right? There's fear. Fear's that element.
Yeah.
Right? Well, anyways, closing thoughts, Aaron?
Bravery, in my opinion, is defined by being afraid and doing it anyways. Because if you're not afraid, there's no bravery.
Yeah.
So I think it's okay to feel some fear. And that's the opportunity where you get to step into relationship with Lord Almighty, because he's the one that strengthens you. He's the one that prepares you for battle. He's the one that will fight your battles and go before you. He is Emmanuel, God with us. So fear not, believer. Fear not. God is with us.
Amen. Have a great day. We'll see you next Saturday, 10 a.m.
Peace.
Thank you for joining us today on Spiritual Insurgency with Jason Lupo and Aaron Lujan. For more information or to support the mission of Spiritual Insurgency, visit spiritualinsurgency.org. Join us next Saturday and every Saturday at 10 a.m.